This seems to be working. And I'm realizing that I should probably have lights in this room, but we'll move on. The Fellowship of the Ring. What I want to do with this video is attempt to go through this chapter by chapter in a somewhat abridged manner. I feel like this is a book that, of course, the movies are incredibly accessible. The book, not so much. There's a lot of flowery language that a lot of people don't really seem to enjoy a whole lot. So what I want to do with this is attempt to make this book more accessible, and hopefully through it, give you enough of a view of the book that you may want to read it yourself. And of course, it's always what I encourage. I mean, if this video gets one view and that one person goes and reads the book, then I had succeeded. So where we're going to start, look at the prologue. The prologue starts with section 1 concerning hobbits. It's pretty easy to understand what's going on here. He's just giving a brief description about hobbits and their way of life. The focus is not a huge bit on how much they eat. There's a section in here on it, but it's not really even close to a quarter of this whole section. Mostly it's just giving descriptions of the 3 different types of hobbits. And from there, he mentions the hobbits here. We got Harfoots, much to do with dwarves, lived in the foothills of the mountains. And then we got the Stores, who like to live on the riverside by the Anduin, which is where Gollum eventually comes from, but we'll get to that later. And then we have the Fallowhides. And it's pointed out later in the book that there's no like true-blooded one specific like breed of hobbit anymore. They're all a combination of whatever. This is telling about the migration of the hobbits and them picking up the common tongue. And then we get to concerning pipeweed. I know 420 Blaze It is a funny meme. They played on it a lot in the movies, which is why like Merry and Pippin are so hungry all the time when they're smoking in the second movie. But in this concerning pipeweed section, we essentially just get told this is tobacco. J.R.R. Tolkien didn't want to use any words that enter the English language any later than the 1600s, any later than 1600, so the 1500s. And tobacco, of course, didn't enter the English language until after the exploration of the New World and the founding of colonies over there. So he thought that tobacco was a newfangled word and therefore didn't like it. So he chose pipeweed, 2 Old English words. Then we have the Ordering of the Shire, which is just telling how the Shire is split into farthings. Then we have a brief section on the finding of the ring. This is just a very shortened down version of what we find in The Hobbit, where Bilbo goes on a journey to find this ring. And as he goes along, he gets lost in the mountain doesn't go on the journey to find the ring. He goes on a journey with these dwarves to Erebor to attempt to reclaim the dwarvish homeland and their treasure. But in doing so, while they're going through the Misty Mountains, Bilbo runs into Gollum. Bilbo has his ring. There's riddles in here. This is in here telling that in the first edition of The Hobbit, Tolkien had actually written that the riddles game actually goes well. Gollum doesn't really get angry with Bilbo. He's just like, oh, I lost, and then leads Bilbo out of the cave. But that doesn't really happen, as we know from later editions of The Hobbit. But what Tolkien is implying here is this earlier version of The Hobbit is what Bilbo ended up telling everybody else of what happened, completely leaving out the ring entirely. Then we have a note on Shire records about how it's kept. And then in this talks about the Red Book of Westmarch, which is the frame narrative through which we are getting the Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is essentially the Red Book of Westmarch, which is Bilbo's book. Bilbo wrote the Red Book of Westmarch, and he then passed that book on to Frodo to write some in it. Then when Frodo and Bilbo left for Valinor, Frodo gave it to Sam. Sam wrote in it, did some additions, did some editing. He then gave it to Pippin. We'll go over that when we get to the last book, if we ever get to the last book. I don't know how, if I'm going to get that far. But he gives it to Pippin, or not Pippin, Merry, because it's stored in the Westmarch in Rohan. It then finds its way to Minas Tirith, where the man is Finnegan King's writer. He ends up doing some additions and some rewritings of the Red Book Westmarch, and it is that book that has been copied down through the ages and translated into the tongue of men that J.R.R. Tolkien is saying he found this Red Book of Westmarch, and this is his translation of that book. That is what the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit is. So that's the frame narrative for this whole series. So we start with chapter 1, a long expected party. So this is starting off, Bilbo is having a party for his 71st birthday. Talks about how rich he is and how many of the people of Bag End think that it came from ill-gotten means, especially when they consider how it appears that he has had perpetual youth, and they say it ought to be, it's going to be paid for. Something's going to happen to him. This is where we get the well-preserved and unchanged wording. That'll be called back to later. But he says here he was generous with his money, so a lot of people just forgave him. He remained on good terms with all of his relatives except for the Saxville Baggins, which you don't see any of if you watch the theatrical version of the movie, but if you watch the extended cut, you will see a glimpse of them at one point. So here is one of the fun bits. Page 1. It's talking about Bilbo's relatives and his younger cousins as they began to grow up. The eldest of these was Bilbo's favorite, the young Frodo Baggins. So technically, Frodo is Bilbo's cousin, like his second cousin, I believe. I'm not great at how family trees work, but I believe he is his second cousin, not his nephew, technically. But he will later be claimed as Bilbo's nephew in Bilbo's will. So here, after Frodo's parents died, he adopts Frodo as his heir, brings him into Bag End, and that makes the Saxville Baggins very upset because they thought they were going to get Bag End when Bilbo died, because Bilbo is not just the master of Bag End, he is the Baggins of Bag End, meaning he is the head of the family. He is the father of all the Baggins, even though he doesn't have any children. He is the head of the family. It's kind of like patrilineal succession, essentially. So Bilbo has now made Frodo his heir. So now, instead of the estate passing to the Saxon Baggins it's going to Frodo. This happened when Frodo was young, and now they share a birthday. Frodo's turning 33 today, and Bilbo is turning 111. Actually, it's not today, it's soon. There are some crazy, exciting things planned for Bilbo's party. Talks about how 11 is a rather curious number because the old Took himself had reached 130, being the oldest Hobbit to ever live in memory. 33 is the year of coming of age for Hobbits, essentially what most of the Western world considers the age of 18 to be. So right now we have what it's kind of like all the old dads down to pub, and they are at the pub. Hamfast Gamgee, Sam Gamgee's dad, commonly known as the Gaffer. He's kind of holding court. He's kind of the big man on campus when it comes to the men who frequent the Ivy Bush. They're all talking, and old Holman the miller is giving the Gaffer some earful, essentially, about Mr. Bilbo. Gaffer's saying that Mr. Bilbo is a well-spoken, gentle hobbit, and he likes that Mr. Bilbo calls him Master Hamfast. And he's always asking him about roots and potatoes and things that the Gaffer enjoys, being a gardener. But old Noakes of Bywater is questioning the Gaffer about Frodo. But he says he's a Baggins, but he spent much of his time over in Buckland, so he's more than half a Brandybuck. And he doesn't understand why Baggins of Hobbiton should go and wife someone up over in Buckland. Folk are odd there. He uses another word that starts with a Q, but I don't think I'm allowed to say that word, so I'm not going to. So you have Daddy Twofoot saying they're weird over there. And no wonder they're weird, it's because they live by the water. The Gaffer says you're right. And the Buckland is right next to the Old Forest, which is also pretty weird. Fool around with boats on that big river, that's not right. And he says it's a small wonder any trouble came from it. And so that kind of pricks everyone's ears up. They mean, what do you mean something came from it? He says, well, Mr. Drogo Baggins, Frodo's father, and his wife drowned. And so everyone goes, drowned? But they've all heard this story before. Hobbits just seem to enjoy drama and retelling of family histories. So they say that Primula Brandybuck, Frodo's mom, and who's also Bilbo's cousin on his mother's side, was with Mr. Drogo. They were on a boat together, and they were having a meal, and one thing led to another, and they fell in. And Sandy Man, the miller, says, I heard she pushed him in. That kind of makes the Gaffer a little upset hearing his master's family being talked bad about. So he says you shouldn't listen to all you hear, Sandy Man. It's also said that he doesn't quite like the miller in general. So there's no call to go talking and pushing and shoving. Boats are tricky enough as is. They talk then about how Frodo, being orphaned, went to go live in Brandy Hall. They say it's a regular warren by all accounts. And that there's hundreds of relations just living in the place. It's just packed. And then one says, I reckon it was a nasty shock for those Saxon Baggins to finally be left out of the will. They thought they already had it when Frodo came back from his journeys, and everyone thought he was dead. They thought they had it then. And then now Bilbo's getting old, And they're like, okay, cool, now we'll get it. But then Frodo comes and now they don't get it at all. Then there's some speculation that there are jewels hidden away inside the place. And the gaffer says, you've heard more than I can speak of. I know nothing about jewels. Mr. Bilbo is free with his money, and there seems to be no lack of it. Again, we just have the gaffer continuing to stand up for Bilbo in every way he can. Gaffer talks about how being the gardener at Bag End has been his family, that his second cousin was the gardener or Holman, and he took over after him. He does say that he saw some mighty big bags and a couple chests of money when Bilbo came back, but that's about it. There's no monstrous mountains of gold, and it sure wasn't enough to fill tunnels. He then talks about how Bilbo is teaching Sam his letters and teaching Sam how to read, and he says, I sure hope nothing comes of nothing. I hope no harm will come of it. Elves and dragons, I say to him, cabbages and potatoes are much better for me and you. He says, don't go getting mixed up in the business of your betters. And he also says, I might say the same to some of you. He looks at the miller, kind of scolding him, but he didn't seem to convince everyone else at the table. Everyone else has heard the stories of Bilbo's gold, and they're like, yeah, right, this guy's just lying because he once sold the gold to himself. They talk about how there's often dwarves that come to visit Bilbo, and Gandalf comes every once in a while. And he says Bag End is a weird place and keeps getting weirder. Might be fun. And Ham Gamgee says, you can say what you like, but you know less about this than you know about boating, Mr. Sandy Man. He said, if being weird has got something to do with it, then we can all be a little better to be a little bit more weird. You might need a little bit more of that in these parts. It says they do things proper up in Bag End. And he says, Sam says, everyone is going to be invited to the party that's going up there. And there's going to be presents. Mark you, presents for all. This very month. That month was September. So we don't get a day on when this took place. So I assume we are early in September. I don't know how far away from the birthday we are. A day or two later, it was rumored that fireworks would be coming to the party. There would be fireworks, and that'd be fun. No one had seen fireworks in the Shire since the day the old Took died, and that was a long, long time ago. So most people living now had never seen fireworks. Days passed, and it drew nearer. And there was an odd-looking wagon laden with odd-looking packages, rolling into Hobbiton, rolled right up all the way to Bag End, and people were just looking out the windows, trying to figure out what's going on. And then at the end of the second week of September, some more carts came through, all being directed on their way to the hill at Bag End. This cart that's being driven in was driven by an old man, driving it all alone. He wore a tall pointed hat with gray cloak and a silver scarf. You don't see the silver scarf in the movie. That's interesting. He had a long white bushy beard and bushy eyebrows that stuck out beyond the rim of his hat. Those are some massive eyebrows. I kind of want to have eyebrows like that. Maybe. Small hobbit children ran after the cart, just like in the movie, following it all the way through Hobbiton, right up the hill. And it was laden, of course, with fireworks. Bilbo's front door, the old man just began to unload the bundles. They were all labeled with a large G rune and a elf rune. That was Gandalf's mark, because the old man was Gandalf. I'm sure that surprised everybody watching. Children are all looking at the packages. They're like, ooh, G, that stands for grand, they would shout. The old man smiled, and they all knew who he was. And he never stopped long, but he came by relatively often. but no one had ever seen his legendary firework displays. Kids were all kind of disappointed because Gandalf didn't even let anything off. He just kind of loaded everything up. He says, "Run away now. You will get plenty when the time comes. Good things come to those who wait, I suppose." So now we change scenes. We are inside Bag End with Bilbo and Gandalf sitting by the window, out looking over the garden. We get a lot of set piece scenery stuff going on. Gandalf's commenting on how great the garden looks. Bilbo said, "Yeah, I like it, but I think I need a holiday." Gandalf says, "What, you mean to go on with the plan then?" And he says, "I do. Made up my mind a month ago." Gandalf says, "All right, do it. Stick to your plan. The whole thing. The whole thing. The whole thing." And so Bilbo replies, "I hope so. Anyway, I mean to enjoy myself at this party. So I'll have my little joke." Gandalf says, "Who will laugh, I wonder?" He says, "We'll see." Gandalf doesn't seem very approving of this little joke. Obviously, if you've seen the movie, you know what the joke is. And if you haven't seen the movie, it'll become apparent very soon. An interesting path that the movie took by having Gandalf not aware of this joke, it's very interesting. When you think of the movie and Bilbo doing the trick, he just disappears. But what's fun about it in the book, I guess we'll get to it. I'll talk about it then. The next day, more carts were up the hill. A lot of people are very upset that Bilbo isn't buying local. They're like, "Oh, why is he importing all this stuff? Why don't you just buy from us?" Very upset. But every week, more and more stuff came to Bag End. People started getting really enthusiastic, began to start ticking off the days to when it was going to happen. They all waited eagerly, looking for the postman, being like, "Hey, bring me my invite, please. I would like my invitation now." Wasn't too long before they started coming in. The post office at Bywater was snowed under, and they had to call in voluntary postmen. And then after all that, they're like, "Cool, whew, job done. We're good now." Then they had the problem of, "Oh my God, everybody's sending these letters back to Bilbo now." So then they just are filled with even more letters. So I'm sure they were very happy about that. Bilbo started getting grumpy that too many people were coming up to his house being like, "Hey, when's the party?" Or, "Hey, what's going on?" So he put a sign on his gate, the very famous sign that I'm sure everyone has seen: "No admittance except on party business." Even then, those who had party business or pretended to have party business, they were just kind of turned away anyway because he didn't want to talk to them. So, I mean, you got to feel for the guy, right? Just don't have a minute alone. Then one morning, the hobbits woke to find the field out in front of Bilbo's place was just covered in poles and rope and tarp, and they were just setting up a giant tent. There was a special entrance cut into the bank leading from the road. So they had the party tree in the middle. They're hanging lanterns from the tree, putting the tent around it. A ton of cooks, tons of food just being brought in general. Everyone's super excited. Then the weather started getting cloudy on that Wednesday. Everyone started getting anxious because the party was supposed to be on Thursday, September 22nd, which is the day that all of us in, I don't want to say real world, but all of us in present world celebrate Hobbit Day or celebrate read J.R.R. Tolkien Day, September 22nd, because it's both Bilbo and Frodo's birthday. So keep that in mind if you ever want a day to start reading the book that could be memorable. I don't know. But on Thursday, the 22nd of September, the clouds went away. Sun came out. It's perfect. It's almost like God wanted this to happen. Bilbo called it a party, but really it was just like a bunch of entertaining things going on all over the field, all at the same time, kind of like Bonnaroo or Lollapalooza. Essentially, you got like 45 billion different stages that you can go to, and everything's happening all at once. And if you're in the middle of all of them, you kind of have no idea what the heck's going on. That's essentially Frodo and Bilbo's birthday. They're all just going nuts and partying. It's Hobbit tradition that on your birthday you give gifts to other people. That would sound like it's very expensive and that you'd never want to celebrate your birthday, nor would you ever want to invite anybody to your birthday. But regifting is a thing. Regifting is very common in Hobbit culture. So if somebody gave you a gift, you just give them the same gift back for their birthday. And I guess it's okay. Or you give them a gift that someone else gave you for their birthday. I don't know. But what is very important about this birthday is Bilbo didn't regift anything. He just bought all new things for everybody. I assume it's like gift basket kind of thing, because there's no way that he knows everybody so much and so well that he got them all personalized gifts. There's no way. So I assume it's like a gift basket thing where it's like, hey, take one, please. And then like a bunch of people take a bunch. I don't know. For the Hobbit children, they got all a bunch of toys made from the dwarves. And some of them were obviously magical. Whatever magic means in Tolkien, we don't ever really get a clear picture of what magic is in Tolkien, which I quite like. You may have a different preference, but it's like Justice Potter Stewart said with obscenity. What is obscenity? Well, I know it when I see it. That's essentially what magic is in Lord of the Rings. You can't really put a definition on it, but you'll know it when you see it, kinda. It's the same way with obscenity. You don't know it really, but we'll see more. So we get a description of some of Gandalf's fireworks. There were squibs, crackers, back wrappers, sparklers, torches, dwarf candles, elf fountains, goblin barkers, and thunderclaps. They talk about the rockets. Can I quote from this, really? I'm not very good on IP law, so I don't know. So for now, I'm not going to. I'm sorry. But yeah, we get long descriptions of the fireworks and how beautiful they are, and then you see the red dragon firework that you see in the book in the movie. Everyone kind of freaks out and they jump down and they all duck and cover their faces, and the dragon here is a fun little thing that may be an anachronism inside the Lord of the Rings. It's one of the few instances of it. There's another instance later when we're going through Bilbo's will, and that same instance is included in The Hobbit, but that one is less anachronistic. But this one can also be explained away just by the framing narrative idea. So it says that the dragon passed like an express train. So obviously at this point in time in history, and keep in mind Tolkien was intending that this is our history. He says in a letter that we are currently living in the seventh age. And remember, this all takes place in the third age. So this world is our world. He's saying seventh age, 1960, whatever, when he wrote this letter. So clearly there weren't express trains yet, because those didn't come until the 18th century, 19th century of the seventh age. So the way to explain this would be that this is clearly something that was written in, this is a artistic flair of a later writer, arguably this later writer right here. This is his flair that he's adding to the translation to try to make it more relatable to a modern audience. Oh, hey, that's more common now. Relatability to a modern audience, right? Okay, cool. That's what he's doing. That's why he puts this anachronism in here. Just like most people who try to relate things to modern audiences, put anachronisms in there. Anyway, Bilbo then says that dragon was the sign for supper, and everyone should come in and dine. So dinner was held inside the great pavilion, all around the tree. There was not the whole party is underneath the tree. Everybody under the tree are only a select portion. I don't want to say few because it's not a few people under this tree, but select people that Bilbo wanted for this dinner specifically. Everyone else ate outside. Okay. Everybody in here was just family relations to Bilbo and Frodo and close friends. The number of people inside here was one gross, 144 people. The reason for that is Bilbo's age plus Frodo's age at this point is 144 years. So Bilbo wanted to reflect the number of people under the tent with the number of years that the two of them have. There were many different family names in this area. Baggins, Boffins, Tooks, Brandybucks, Grubbs, Chubbs, Burrowses, Bolgers, Brace Girdles, Brockhouses, Good Bodies, Hornblowers, Proudfoots, as well. The Saxville Baggins are there. I'm sure they're very happy to be there. They dislike Bilbo and Frodo, but any way to get a free meal, they're down for it. They're going to go. They're like, all right, well, we don't like this guy, but he's going to feed us, so we might as well go. So they're all there waiting, and they were not disappointed. It was a pleasant feast. They were all happy. Tons of great food. They're all excited. After the feast, though, came the speech, part everyone was dreading. They're like, oh my gosh, this guy is just going to wax poetic for hours and hours and hours while we're just going to have to sit here and politely look at him and really wish that we were face deep in these mashed potatoes and turkey. Like, I don't want to listen to him. I want a mug of beer in my mouth. Why do you want to give this speech? It better be quick. So Bilbo starts, my dear people, hear, hear, hear. They all yell back to him. And he's got their good favor for at least the beginning of this. So then he starts again. My dear Baggins and Boffins and et cetera, and goes through every single one of them. There's even the part in the movie that they got right, or they pulled from the book directly, Proud Foots. Then he yells, Proud Feet. But then Bilbo repeats himself and corrects Mr. Proudfoot. It says Proud Foots. He welcomes them all to Bag End for his 111th birthday. I am 111 today, and everyone cheers. Ha ha, hooray, many happy returns. And then all of a sudden, people start like banging on tables and like jumping up and shouting. Bilbo then continues, I hope you are all enjoying yourselves. Tons of yeses. Couple no's. There's always that one person in the crowd that's like, no, and then they like look at their friend like, I got him. At this point too, people start going nuts. Like, they're like, okay, cool, that was all he wanted to say, so we're just gonna hop up on the table and like start dancing real fast and like going crazy. And then a bunch of these kids that got like musical instruments for Bilbo's birthday just start like playing them. And there's just a giant orchestra and people dancing. And Bilbo's like not even done with his speech. He's like, come on, guys, give me 10 minutes. Pretty soon the noise stopped. He says, I won't keep you long. Called y'all here for a purpose. We're going to see what that purpose is. He says he brought them for 3 purposes. First of all, tell you he loves you all. And that 11 years is too short a time to live among such excellent and admirable hobbits. He then says the famous line from the movie, I don't know half of you, half as well as I should like, and I like less than half of you, half as well as you deserve. Everyone kind of tries to figure out, like, did he just call me an asshole? Or so everyone's trying to figure that out, and he just keeps going. Secondly, to celebrate my birthday, everyone cheers. He says, or I should say our birthday. And he gestures to poor old Frodo over there, and the older ones cheer, and the younger ones like, Frodo, Frodo, jolly old Frodo. So he says, together we score 144. You were chosen to be here to fulfill that number. Everyone's like, hold on. Did you really want to party with us? Or are we just here to satisfy this number? They're all kind of upset. I mean, understandably. Also, apparently, using the term one gross to talk about 144 people is rather vulgar and obscene. So a lot of people are very upset. One, they just got called gross. 2, they're like, I only came here to fulfill a number. He also talks about how this is the anniversary of him showing up at the Long Lake in The Hobbit, and he goes, "Dead goo belly butch," because he had a cold. Everyone's like, all right, wrap it up, dude. They're all kind of upset. They're silent. They're like, we just got insulted really hard. Now you're trying to like crack a really bad dad joke. So come on. So he says, third and finally, I wish to make an announcement. He spoke these words, and everyone kind of just like, okay, what's your announcement? And he says, I regret to announce that I'm going. Deuces. Now, goodbye. And he stepped down and vanished. It was a blinding flash of light, loud noise, smoke, poof. Now that isn't added in the movie for the obvious reason of they are saying that Gandalf wasn't in on the joke. But we'll see later that Gandalf is going to take claim to that fire or the like explosion and poof and blinding light, just so that like Bilbo didn't blow the secret of the ring with going invisible with the ring. So that's why. So everyone freaks out. Everyone's kind of upset. And they're like, you know what? We're going to need some more food to make us not angry again. So more food's brought out. People are gossiping already. Frodo sent around another round of wine. And he's like, well, this sucks because now I have to make sure that everyone doesn't hate us. So Frodo has to be the extra nice guest or host and kind of just take care of everybody. But yeah, as I said here, Frodo did not want to have any more to do with this party. He's like, this sucks. Thanks, Bilbo. That was awesome what you did. That's great. So he then got up, drained his glass, and he goes, nope, I'm out later. And he just left the pavilion. So we're going to change scenes again. So Bilbo. So this is back to Bilbo's point of view while he's giving the speech. Finger in the ring while he's giving the speech. And he put it on. As he stepped down, it slipped on his finger, and he was gone. He walked really quickly back to the Hobbit hole and stood for a moment and like listened to like everyone freaking out. And he's like, ha, 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 ha. Like the little edgelord he is. Went in, took off his party clothes, folded them up, wrapped them in tissue paper, and put them away. He quickly put on a bunch of old clothes, an old cloak as well, which for those who have read the Hobbit. This is the same cloak that he wore on that journey. He put a leather belt around his waist and hung his short sword from it. It's Sting right there. And he started to go to set out. He grabbed his book with him as well, a couple old clothes, stuff like that. But he put the ring then in an envelope like he does in the movie. And he's going to go put it on the mantelpiece. And as he's about to do that, he sticks it back in his pocket. And Gandalf comes in. Bilbo says, "Hey, what's up? Wonder when you were going to get here." Gandalf, of course, being snarky, says he's glad to see that Bilbo's visible again. Bilbo says that Gandalf surprised him with the little flash, scared him. He says, that was you, I suppose. And Gandalf says, "Yeah, just trying to make sure that you didn't, give away the whole shebang." And Bilbo says that he spoiled his joke and that he's an interfering old busybody, but he laughs when he's saying it. So obviously he's joking. He says, I expect you know best." Gandalf says he does. And he says, "Are you going to go any further with your plan?" I said, "Yep, I feel like I need a holiday. I'm going to do it. I'm too old." This is where he's joking. He says, "Well preserved indeed. I feel thin like butter spread over too much bread," and that he needs a change. He, again, like he says in the movie, wants to find somewhere to finish his books. He says, "I think I found an ending to it." And he lived happily ever after to the end of his days. Gandalf that. I hope he does. Bilbo asks for Gandalf to keep an eye on Frodo. He says he will. 2 eyes as often as I can spare them. They do a really good job at carrying over a lot of the dialogue from the early portion of this first book into the first movie. I believe that goes far to saying like how good the dialogue is in this like first book at setting the stage for what we're about to go through, that Jackson and company were like, well, I mean, it's here. Like, we just do this and it sets the stage. So just do this, which I really enjoy. And I think The Fellowship had been for a long time my favorite movie for that purpose, because it did such an excellent job at setting that stage. Bilbo then says that he's leaving everything to Frodo, and Gandalf says, "Everything? Like the ring too, my guy?" And he says, "Yeah, maybe not." And then Gandalf says, "Well, where is it?" And he replies, "It's in an envelope on the mantelpiece." Wait, that's odd. No, it's in my pocket right now. Gandalf then looks at Bilbo. He's like, "I think you should leave it, my guy." And Bilbo's like, "Yeah, well, no, I don't really want to." And then he kind of flips at this point. "Why are you always badgering me about my ring? You never bothered about it before. Why now?" I was like, "I'm not badgering you. Just want to tell you the truth. It's important. Magic rings are magical. You don't want to mess around with them." Bilbo gets angry. "What business is yours? What I do with my own things?" And he said, "It's my own. I found it. It came to me." This is where we start getting some crazy coming in, especially with that last line, "It came to me." This is going along with the theme that the ring has a semi-state of sentience. The ring can choose who it goes after and who it follows, to a point, obviously not always. And this goes with like, the ties in with fate and who's fated to have this ring, and is the ring choosing or is fate choosing? A lot of big questions in this book that I'm probably not going to go into. So I'm sorry. Read the book for yourself. And there's a myriad of other podcasts that do go into that stuff. I am just a poor, dumb college student. So we have Bilbo calling it his precious again. And Gandalf's like, well, someone else called it that too. Like, not just you. He's like, well, I'm saying it now. So what? He says, I'm going to keep it. I say, I shall keep it. And Gandalf's like, well, you'd be an idiot to do that. That'd be the dumb move. Be a very stupid person. He says, it's got far too much hold on you. Let it go. You can be free right now if you just let go. And Bilbo's like, nope, I'll do what I want. And Gandalf's like, hey, come on, calm down. It's all good. You promised that you'd give it up, so give it up. And then Bilbo's like, you want it for yourself. You don't want me to just give it up. You want it for yourself. And he goes and he grabs his sword. Actually, his hand strays to the hilt of his sword, so he doesn't quite grab it, but he's about to just whip that thing out and be like, hey, Gandalf think it's really, he says, I'm gonna get angry real soon. If you say that again, you will see Gandalf the Grey uncloaked. There's a more deeper question of what does it mean for Gandalf the Grey to be uncloaked. If you want, there's a fantastic podcast by Professor Corey Olsen called Exploring the Lord of the Rings, where that line itself, as well as other times uncloaked is used in the Lord of the Rings, is the topic of discussion for maybe 10, 15 hours worth of podcast. If you want to watch that, I highly recommend it. If you like things in that absurdly neurodivergent level of detail, yeah, check that out. But just keep in mind it's notable that he's saying uncloaked. So Bilbo starts backing away. He's kind of freaking out. Slowly relaxes his hands, and Gandalf's like, I don't know what's come over you. You never did this before. Why are you doing this now? And Bill was like, but Gollum would have killed me if I didn't keep it. I'm not a thief. I swear, whatever he said. Gandalf's like, I didn't call you one, and I'm not one either. So don't you call me that. Just hey, give it up. So Bilbo has his hand over his eyes. He's like, I'm sorry, I just felt weird. In a way, it'd be a relief not to bother about it anymore. This kind of reminds me a lot of like when I was quitting smoking. Like, it got to the point where I just had to tell myself, like, just don't buy anymore. If you don't buy anymore, you won't smoke anymore. And I just never went inside gas stations ever again. And that was weird. But after like a week or so, it was better. So yeah, if you're trying to quit smoking, never enter gas stations, ever. You will smoke again immediately the second you go inside one. So don't ever go inside gas stations. I don't know why I keep getting off on these tangents. Bilbo's saying that he's not sure if he made up his mind. Gandalf said, I have. Trust me. All right, listen to me. Do what I say. But like, you got to do it. And so Bilbo says, I will. And Bilbo says, all right. He goes to Frodo, drew a deep breath, and now I really must be going. Gotta go. And he starts to walk out the door, and just like in the movie, Gandalf says, it's still in your pocket. Dude, what are you doing? Why are you leaving? He goes, oh, well, I do. Weird. Weird. And so Bilbo goes to give the ring to Gandalf to give to Frodo, and he says, no, don't give it to me. Don't give it to me. Put it on the mantelpiece. Put it on the mantle right now. So Bilbo puts it on the mantle, takes out the puts it on the mantle, and as he lets go, he gets a little angry, like the image in the first movie when he sees the ring in Rivendell, and got the creepy face. That's always fun. But then suddenly he looks like he's relieved and he laughs. That laugh's interesting. Like, is it a nervous laugh? Is it like an actual laugh of like relief? I don't know. It's up for you to decide as the reader. Read the book. And he says, that's it. I'm off. I'm going. And he walks out the hall. and says goodbye to Gandalf, and Gandalf says goodbye for now. He's going to see him again. He says, take care, you're old enough and perhaps wise enough. And as he leaves, he sings a song. Now, I don't know how I'm going to cover the songs in this series. In one vein, they're rather short most of the time. So like it wouldn't bother or it wouldn't be bad to read them, but of course I don't want to get hit with like some stupid copyright thing from the Tolkien estate. That would be really dumb. And since that would be a really dumb thing to copyright strike, that makes me think that they'd absolutely do that. And then I could always give like a brief explanation of what's going on in the poem, of course. I guess leave in the comments what you want me to do. I'll just read this poem since it's the song that everybody hears everywhere. It's like the most well-known song out of the entire Lord of the Rings universe. So the road goes ever on and on, down from the door where it began. Now far ahead the road has gone, and I must follow if I can, pursuing it with eager feet until it joins some larger way, where many paths and errands meet, and whither then I cannot say. We're going to see a very fun inversion of this poem when Frodo gets a little flight of fancy of wanting to recite a poem himself. The poems are going to be similar, but they're not going to match exactly. And I believe that change, or I know that change is an important thing for what's going on narratively at each of these moments. So he pauses, looks at everything as he's leaving. This is the point in the movie where he makes I think I found an ending for my book, but he's just going to say goodbye, and Gandalf again replies to himself at this point because Bill is too far away. Goodbye until our next meeting. So now we jump to Frodo. Scene change. Everyone's gone. Frodo's walking up to the Hobbit hole, and he found Gandalf sitting in the dark there. Ask if he's gone. No need to say who. We already know. We're just that close. I mean, it's pretty obvious. Gandalf says, yep, he's gone at last. Frodo says, I hoped this evening was only a joke. So clearly he knew the greater plan for Bilbo. He just hoped that it wasn't going to happen. He says, I wish I'd come back sooner to see him off. And it's like, nope, he's more of those one of those Irish goodbye guys. Would have been too sad. He wouldn't have wanted to leave, and we wouldn't have been able to have our little fight and me use some wizardy powers to intimidate him, and then him finally relinquish the ring. I don't really think that that's what happened. I don't think that that's why. I don't think it was a threat. I'm kind of talking off the cuff here, so we're just going to move on. Gandalf says he left a packet for you. Here it is. Frodo took the envelope off the mantelpiece. Didn't open it, though. It says inside it, all the documents you need. It's the will, it's the deed, you're the master of Bag End, and inside there, you're also going to find a ring. Frodo seems very excited about this. The ring? The ring! He left me that? He's like, still be useful for him. I wonder why he left that. I don't think he'd ever leave this. Then Gandalf goes to bed. Unlike in the movies, we don't have this discussion at night. That's going to happen. I believe it's interesting that that discussion about the ring happens at night. It certainly sets a mood. We're actually not going to get that discussion of the ring until the next chapter. We've got a couple days before that discussion happens. So it's an interesting change in the movie, but I think a good one. It's one that this is where some fat could have been cut. Not saying that Tolkien himself needed to cut this. I think this is very important to the book in an attempt to set the stage introduce us to our characters, because when you look at it, all we've had was Bilbo. This is our first ever introduction to Frodo. So we want to spend some time with Frodo in normal circumstances before we take him out of the normal and put him into fairyland, essentially. So I believe that this is necessary for the book. But this is certainly somewhere where the movie thought it could have been trimmed, and I agree. So scene change. As Master Bag End, Frodo had the duty of saying goodbye to everybody that was at the party last night. There were still a bunch of drunkards and people passed out in the field, and there were wheelbarrows used for removing people from the field and places like that. So there were still some presents left to give out. As I said before, there was kind of the little basket of, hey, take a present type thing. But there were some people that had their own presents, and specifically people mentioned in Bilbo's will, gifts to go to them from Bilbo in his will. So Frodo is just making sure that all those ducks are in a row. Everything's labeled. Everything's good. So people start coming up from the house asking for Bilbo. Frodo greets them all, and he's like, yeah, Bilbo's not here. Greets them all with a smile. They ask what's up with him. He goes, nothing. He's just gone. This is going to be interesting later. So he starts looking through the labels of things for people. You got Adelard Took. He gets an umbrella. That is the other anachronism that people point out to in The Lord of the Rings. And notice, none of the anachronisms in The Lord of the Rings that people find have to do with verisimilitude. Okay, it is all internally consistent. When the anachronisms come in is when you look at The Lord of the Rings, how Tolkien originally intended it to be looked at as our actual history, the history of the actual world here, the history of Northern Europe. And when you see things in here that obviously didn't exist in that time, or even in the time that this is emulating as a period, obviously this is semi-medieval, arguably like high medieval, so like 13 to 1600s, like just pre-Renaissance. Obviously they didn't have steam trains, and then obviously they also didn't have umbrellas. But when you start looking at actual medieval writings, that's what my focus of study is medieval writing. You have things like Thomas Malory writing about Sir Thomas Malory, must show him the correct respect. Sir Thomas Malory in the 1300s writing about Sir Arthur, or King Arthur, and his knights of the Round Table, who in his mind existed in the 500s AD. But he's writing about them wearing full plate armor and riding on horses and jousting. Obviously, that wasn't the mode of war at the time. Plate armor was not, nor was like jousting. Obviously, there's cavalry and stuff like that, but the mode was different. So, in medieval writings, in pre-archaeological writing, it is not at all common to attempt to be what we would call historically accurate. That just isn't a concept for them, because what we have today is what people always had, right? I don't want to simplify it that much, but that's essentially the gist of it, is that you tend to localize the time. Like you got Chaucer writing a Troilus Crusade, but writing as if they were, for him, modern knights, but they were Trojan warriors. That's how it is, and that's why I find these small bits of anachronisms to be very funny, because Tolkien was also a medievalist, so I kind of like it. Then we got Dora Baggins, in memory of a long correspondence with love from Bilbo, and for her he put a waste paper basket, because Dora wrote reams of good advice for people. So Bilbo is essentially telling her to throw it in the trash. Or you could just be being like, hey, keep writing, and then here's a waste paper basket for when you don't want this piece. But more likely, he's probably just telling her to throw it in the trash. Milo Burrows got a pen and ink bottle because he never answered letters. For Angelica's use from Uncle Bilbo, a convex mirror because she always thought her face was shapely. Hugo Bracegirdle got an empty bookcase because he was very good at borrowing books, but not very good at returning them. And Lobelia Saxby Baggins got a bunch of spoons, silver spoons, because she, in The Hobbit, was stealing Bilbo's spoons when he came back from his adventure. First use of the word mathams in the story right here. There were one or two old mathams. Mathams are like an old thing, or not old. Mathams are like a gift, or like a knick-knack of sorts that you have. It's a Old English word. You see it in the poem The Wanderer, where the Lord is referenced to in a kenning. He's called Matham-Gifar or Matham-Gifar. Depends. Some people say that G's before front vowels still make a gus sound, and some people say G's before front vowels made a wife sound in Old English. I haven't quite gotten a straight answer on it, but Matham-Gifar just means Matham giver or gift giver. Some translations say ring giver. That's just a way of saying the Lord, because the Lord is the guy who gives the ring. So the ring giver, the Matham-Gifar, is the Lord. But yeah, fun little use of Matham. This is the first time it's used in this book. It'll get used later. And I will be sure to point it out when it's used later, because I love that word. This is just a longer gift, or a longer list of gifts that are all given. The ones that I read out before were all like separated, but this is just like a huge list of gifts that are all given. He specifically gave the gaffer a lot. He gave him sacks of potatoes, a new spade, a woolen waistcoat or waistcoat. I prefer waistcoat. Some people say waistcoat. I disagree with them. And he gave him a bottle of ointment for creaky joints. So Frodo had a hard time that afternoon because it had gone out as a rumor that Frodo's just giving stuff away from the house. He's just like, yeah, take everything. Obviously, that's not true. Obviously, all these people that are coming and taking things were in Bilbo's will. But Frodo then starts having to fight people, essentially, to get them out of the house. Because they keep trying to come in and like just steal stuff. A lot of people are carrying off things that like weren't gifted to them. Other people are like making trades in the living room. It's just hectic. And the Saxby Bagginses are bursting in, trying to ask where the heck Frodo is. So Mary Brandybuck, our first mention, I believe, of him, tells Lobelia Saxby Baggins that Frodo's indisposed and he's resting, and you can't talk to him. And she goes, well, it's more like he's hiding. There's no way he's just resting. He just doesn't want to talk to me, and I mean to see him. So go tell him that. And Mary just left them for a very long time in the hall, and just took his merry old time going to tell Frodo about it. Seems that Lobelia was kind of mad that she only got spoons. And she thought that was a very mean joke of Bilbo. So the Saxby Baggins then started giving Frodo really bad prices for Bag End. They're like, hey, just give us everything. We'll give you like 2 doll hairs for the whole place. Obviously, he's not going to take those. And so Otho, Saxby Baggins, is like, well, looks like you're doing really well out of this whole will thing. And Frodo's like, well, yeah, done. The heir. I'm going to, idiot. And so then Frodo goes and he grabs the will and shows. He's like, hey, look, everything's signed, everything's filled out. Paperwork's good. All works. And so then Otho's just like, oh, foiled again. Rats. Dag nabbit. So after waiting 60 years, spoons. Fiddlesticks. Snapped his fingers under Frodo's nose and stomped off. So Frodo kind of goes back to being a recluse. But then he comes out and he sees Lobelia knocking around. And he's like, well, what you doing over there? And he has her removed from the premises. And it seems that some other items had fallen into her umbrella while she was knocking about in there. So those were taken back, and her face was very grumpy because she's angry that Frodo caught her stealing. How dare you catch me stealing? You'll live to regret it, young fellow. She says, you're not a Baggins. You're a brandy buck. So then Frodo looks at Merry and goes, you hear that? That was an insult. Merry says that was a compliment. And not, of course, true. Apparently, there were 3 young hobbits trying to knock holes in walls to excavate to try to find those tunnels of jewels and gold. So they grab those 3 hobbits, throw them out, and Frodo plops down in a chair, very exhausted by the day's work. But not long after he sat down, there was a knock at the door. And so as he heard the knock at the door, he kind of walked up. He's like, oh, it's probably Lobelia again. And he walks up, and the knocking's getting louder and louder as he comes up. And then he hears from the other side, if you don't let me in, Frodo, I shall blow this door right down your hole and out through the other side of the hill. That was obviously Gandalf. So Frodo quickly unlatches the door, lets him in. Says he's sorry. Thought you were Lobelia. It's like, yeah, I saw her on the way here. She looked pretty angry. Frodo said, yeah, I was so frustrated with her, I almost just put on the ring to disappear. And Gandalf's like, don't do that. That would be a terrible idea. Do not do that. So they start talking about the ring. Gandalf asks Frodo what he knows. Frodo's like, well, only what Bilbo told me. He goes, ooh, what story? I guess this is going back to what I mentioned earlier about how there were 2 stories that Bilbo told. He told the story that is in the 2nd edition of The Hobbit to Gandalf and Frodo, and he told the story that's in the 1st edition of The Hobbit to literally everybody else. So Frodo says, well, he told me the real story. Don't worry. And Gandalf said, well, that's interesting. What did you think of it? And he goes, well, if you mean the idea of inventing all about the present idea, then yeah, it was very unlike Bilbo to invent that story, so it's rather odd. They talk about how it makes you vanish. Frodo said, I don't really understand. Gandalf's like, neither do I. I've just now begun to start wondering about it, especially since last night. Don't worry though, it'll all be good. Just keep it secret. Keep it safe. Frodo's like, why are you being so weird about this? He goes, I'm not certain, so I won't say any more. And then he's like, all right, goodbye. He literally just pops in. Frodo mentions wanting to put on the ring because the Saxville Baggins, and he's like, don't do that. And then he's like, well, that ring's creepy. Did Bilbo tell you about it? Yep. Yeah, it's weird. Not gonna tell you anymore. Bye. And then just leaves. So he's gotta go. Frodo says, at once? Well, I thought you were, gonna stay for a week. I was looking forward to your help. And Gandalf says he meant to. He was going to. I swear. I promise. I'm not just leaving because everything's going crazy right now. I promise you. He says he's become unpopular in the area. People are starting to think that Frodo and Gandalf kind of work together to just knock off Bilbo. And take all of his money and his stuff. So that's happening. He's like, some people are saying that. Frodo's like, some people? You mean Otho and Lobelia? And he's like, I gotta go tell them off. And Frodo begins to wish that he left with Bilbo. And Gandalf says, well, so do I. Frodo also says he wishes he'll see him again. Gandalf says, so do I. And I wish many other things. But goodbye. So he leaves. Frodo sees him to the door. Final wave of his hand. They walk off. Frodo thought that the wizard looked unusually bent. As his cloaked figure vanished into the twilight, Frodo did not see him again for a very long time. And that is the prologue and chapter 1. I'm hoping to do this for the whole series prior to the Rings of Power coming out, just to attempt to give a little bit of context for those who are going to watch the show. When the show does come out as well, I will be watching it, hopefully doing reviews of it. If I have to get a Twitch, I'll get a Twitch just so I can live stream it and then record the video and save the VOD and use the VOD on YouTube. I don't know. I'll figure it out. But yeah. So I hope you all enjoy. I actually really enjoyed doing this. I feel like I'm going to get a much better sense of like the books. I'm very excited for some of the more major chapters that come along. So yeah, I hope you all join me on this, and I hope you all have a great day. Logos, scribs, and all that other stuff, All right, bye.